and there might be some people joining us as we go along. So good afternoon and a very warm welcome to today's webinar. My name is Lisa and I am the marketing manager at Capacitas. I'm delighted to be joined by Simon Pryor, head of QE at easyJet, and Danny Quilton, who is the co-founder and CTO at Capacitas, who actually started working with easyJet way back in 2004. Unfortunately, Prasham's had a family emergency, so he is not able to join us today. However, Simon and Danny will be sharing insights into easyJet's growth strategy. We'll be talking about how rigorous performance testing, automation, and operational optimization help streamline processes and control costs across easyJet's really rather complex technology landscape. We expect the webinar to last around 45 minutes with time for Q&As at the end. So feel free to drop any questions you have in the comments as we go along. And with that said, I'll not keep you any longer. It's my absolute pleasure to hand you over to Danny and to Simon.
Thanks, Lisa. Welcome, everybody. As Lisa said, I'm one of the co-founders at Capacitas, and giving away my age here, I first started working on the easyJet account back in 2004. But yeah, that's me. Simon.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. I'm Simon Pryor, head of quality engineering here at easyJet, looking after all the testing quality services across all of our e-commerce and IT systems, which we'll talk about the complexity of as we go on. But yeah, back over to you, Danny.
Great. So we're going to talk a little bit about the background to easyJet and Capacitas, and we're going to tell the story today about the commercial systems, and so we'll give you a bit of an overview of what those commercial systems comprise of, and then really what was the trigger for modernization and migration to the cloud, and what started us off on that journey, if you like. And we'll finish off talking a bit more about the value to the business, and as Lisa said, she's going to be collating the questions as we go through, and we'll do some Q&A at the end. So really, just firstly, a bit about Capacitas. So we are the global cloud optimization experts in cost, scalability, and performance, and we work with growing firms that have scaled complex systems in the cloud, and it's because they're complex and scale, they tend to have these challenges. So the first one around scalability, where either systems can't scale or there's uncertainty about their scalability or what the limits are. Then around cost, and cloud cost, as everyone knows, is a hot topic these days, and the symptoms could be margin erosion for SaaS firms and their products. It could be a significant variance between what's planned spend in the cloud and what's actually happening in the cloud. And also an important symptom that we often discover is where costs are being, or spend's being diverted away from technology and product teams into cloud spend, and that's having an impact on delivery. And then the third area is around performance, where there could be degraded customer experience at peak or high rates of service outages. And really, at a 30,000 feet view, what we do is tackle quality. And so we talk about quality, we're talking about scalability, resilience, performance, and then doing that with value. So what we mean by that is doing that cost efficiently in the cloud. And then the third area there is speed. It's about getting feature and product and change delivered quickly, because that's, when you speak to many CIOs, that's a big imperative for them. And I won't dwell too much on this, but it's suffice to say all of the clients we work with, they all have scale and complexity in the cloud. And like easyJet, they have critical customer experience requirements during their peaks. And yeah, Simon can talk a little bit more about easyJet.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. So, easyJet, as a lot of you will know, we're very, very known for our brand. We're one of the largest airlines in the world. We're just over 340 aircraft, just over 1,000 routes that we operate with, our peak times, 2,000 flights per day. revenue, it's just coming up to the end of year results. I'm sure this number will change, but at the last view, it was £8 billion in revenue, and over 83 million passengers travel with us every year. So I mean, that's they're big numbers, and when we look at the peak times, so we'll talk a bit more about the specific peaks. But at any one point at a peak time, we can sell at the rate of 15 aircraft every minute through number of bookings. So yeah, Danny, over to you if there's anything else for you to add.
Yep.
So yeah, on the growth side, so we are planning over the next few years we will be growing further, probably closer to the 400 aircraft, and the routes and our network's growing. That will continue to grow. Our IT systems. So we have over 150 systems within our estate. Everything from our website and our applications and our commercial systems, all the way to our operational systems that crew and roster the flights and keep the maintenance of the aircraft, etc., etc. And the way we work, majority of those systems are third-party SaaS vendor solutions, which makes the estate very complex, especially when looking at things like performance and capacity and scaling. We need to use third parties to help us do that in a lot of scenarios. Our values have always been we're a low-cost airline, not a budget airline. We very much focus on the customer first, and we realise the market is highly competitive. And as we continue to grow, we're looking for opportunities to continue to push that forward.
Yeah, and I think just to follow up on what Simon was saying, that growth chart you see at the top of the screen there, that's really the driver for this entire engagement, and this growth in aircraft and subsequent growth in seats and revenue is super important to the business to achieve.
So shall I start with this one, Danny?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I mean, I've only been with easyJet for 5 years, but when I joined in 2020, Capacitas were already very well embedded into the organisation. You can see from the very early engagements around our easyjet.com engagement in 2004. Mainly when Capacitas came on board, they were very much a performance testing partner and doing some some capacity assurance for our key systems. Since I've joined, that relationship has grown into focusing as much on test automation, on test environments. There's been some work on our overall QE strategy and various leadership roles on major projects as well. So Capacitas have become a strategic partner for me from a quality engineering perspective. They buy into the values that we've built as a team. They're a key part of driving and building and collaborating on the strategy. And to top that off, last year we were award winners in the European Software Testing Awards for Best Automation Project for an effort that we'd worked together on our commercial stack. So lots of positives, and the relationship continues to blossom. Danny, I don't know if you want to add anything on that.
Yeah, I think just as we go through this deck, this emphasis on one team, it's really important. And I know a lot of firms say this, but it actually truly happens at easyJet, whereby, Capacitas and easyJet work together. But it's not just us, it's also a number of other third parties that contributed to the achievements we're going to talk about in the commercial services arena.
Yeah, so as part of this, the strategy build, two of the key elements for this was we collaborated together with Capacitas and our internal team and our other partners to come up with these high-level principles that we work from. And these really are embedded into everything we do. And one of the key roles that I've created since I've become head of quality engineering was the need for the quality engineering architect role. And it's a role that Capacitas have filled on a couple of different projects for us now, alongside the perm team we're growing and the partner architect group. But the focus of the architect is on defining how we test, how we deliver quality within a solution. They'll work side by side with a QE test manager to make sure that deliveries happen. But their focus is very much on the how and what are we doing, and how do we ensure we're doing the right testing? How do we come up with the right tests? how do we design test automation? Do we know when and where it fits? And the teams will work. So just to walk through them quickly, it's proactive prevention over reactive inspection. So that is definitely being involved early and making sure that we're identifying challenges and tests before the issues become apparent later on. So we're not retrofitting things. Data-driven decisions over assumptions. We try where possible to use data to inform our testing, whether that be through monitoring and observability of our customer interactions with our systems, and making sure that we cover the key paths within that. Customer needs over process rigidity. We will adapt our style of how we need to do the testing depending on the project and depending on the needs of the particular scenario. Automation over manual repetition. We still value manual testing. There's still an importance for it, but we will always identify automation as early as possible rather than it being a thing that we do afterwards, so that the automation is up and running as part of the projects. Collaboration over siloed work. We definitely work together as a team. Where possible, we work side by side, whether that be virtually or in person, with the key stakeholders, with the developers, with the third parties that we're working alongside. We try and work as one team and ensure that we're collaborating at every opportunity. Proactive risk strategy. So we do focus on risk-based testing where possible, and we identify key risks. And as we talk through the commercial or the core reservation system, we will see that risk became a big part of it, and we identified a risk strategy around that. Early and continuous quality. It's not about testing only happening at the end. Testing and conversations about quality start at the beginning, and they continue all the way through any life cycle that we're working through. And being able to configure and adapt our approach to quality is key as well. We don't have a one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter approach. We do try and make sure that we adapt to the particular project demands and needs and timelines to make sure we have the right approach in place at all times.
Yep. So the focus of this story is the core reservation system, or CRS, and at easyJet. This is a central repository for all flight and booking data. It's actually one of the largest SQL servers, transactional SQL servers in Europe. And going back to the beginning of this story, it was on premise in 2019. And yeah, Simon, I guess a key thing here is that this is a highly integrated system, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it plugs into majority of our IT estate. There's a lot of systems that depend and either pass data back to this or feed data or gather data from it. So it's making sure those integrations with systems both on the operational side and the commercial side are key to make sure that we can operate on a day-to-day basis. So we are very highly focused on making sure that this system and its integrations are working at all times. So yeah, our testing and quality approach needs to be bang on.
Yeah, and it's supporting business critical workloads. Obviously, flight availability search, flight booking. Clearly, those are linked directly back to revenue. But also, just as important, passenger boarding and passenger check-in. And we've all seen examples. I think there was one recently in the States where an airline had outages on passenger check-in, and you can see that firstly that has a profound impact on the customer experience, but secondly as well from a airport perspective, that can have massive impacts on individual airports and their physical capacity to handle those kind of outages. Simon, do you want to just give us an overview, and I can jump into the detail around peak?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you can see from the middle the normal day bookings is fairly constant throughout the waking hours of the day. But that graph doesn't show, you can't see from the graph, that those are still pretty high numbers when you think about the number of flights and potential customers that we have, that those numbers are relatively high. As soon as we advertise a promotion, though, as you can see on the graphs on the left and right, they do go up incredibly high. And particularly with the routes extension, when we announce that we're putting flights on sale for the following summer or 15 months into the future, the the demand is very high very quickly. So from the moment they go live, we do see a massive peak in people making bookings, and we have to make sure that our systems can cope with that. Danny, do you want to talk a bit more about the detail?
Yeah, sure. And I guess there's two things really to pull out. Firstly, what you're seeing here are peak to average ratios around 5-1. And look, those are, from a systems performance perspective, those are very tricky to deal with. And then, as Simon says, on routes extension, there is, as you can see on the left-hand side, there is a very large number of customer arrivals in a very short space of time. So these, what we call spiky workloads, again, from a systems performance and availability, reliability perspective, these are very difficult to deal with. But we'll get into some of the detail of how we manage those. I think the key thing when you've got these kind of workloads is you need to just prepare and plan well in advance.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the story begins back in 2019, where we had one of these routes extension events, and we had a significant increase in demand compared to the previous year. And this was great for easyJet from a revenue perspective in terms of seats sold. Typically seeing around 40 to 50,000 concurrent users on the site at any point in time. But it did, when we have these events, we closely monitor the production systems, and it was apparent that the core reservation system was almost at full capacity, particularly around its CPU load and CPU capacity. So this was a clear risk given that easyJet was on this growth trajectory with aircraft. This was a clear risk that had to be mitigated, and this led to the initiation of a CRS modernization program. So this consisted of a number of phases to get to a point where we could migrate the service into the cloud. And you might be saying, well, why didn't we just lift and shift this system into the cloud on day one and get all the great scalability that comes with the cloud? And there was really two key reasons. Number one, this system was a highly integrated system, and lifting and shifting that would have been very risky from a delivery perspective. And then I think number two is we knew from what had occurred in the previous peaks, we knew we had some scalability bottlenecks that we wanted to address. And we didn't want to lift and shift those into the cloud because, when you do that, you're carrying that debt into the cloud. And then you're also having to deal with that from a performance perspective, but also having to deal with it from a cost perspective. Typically, application services workloads that have performance scalability constraints, you need to throw extra capacity at those in the cloud, and that comes as a cost. So we'll talk about these steps in a bit more detail. But Simon, the thing that really underpinned it was the quality engineering and process and automation.
Yeah, absolutely. And we made sure we had the right strategy for all stages of this process, making sure we had automation in the right places. And this is just an example of the types of steps we took along the way. So this isn't necessarily a waterfall process particularly, but this just highlights the steps that we would have taken at each stage throughout the process, from ensuring requirements are testable, risks in Jira are identified, test plans, different levels of automation, so both in parallel with the code in the same repo, but then also doing component environment automated tests and end-to-end and systems acceptance testing through automation and exploratory testing as well. We had the right static analysis tools in place at the code level, where we were able to access code to be able to run those tools as well in the pipeline, and then all the way through to once we release in production, having that team on board on the night of releasing, with the canary testing in production to make sure that everything's working, and the ability to roll back if needed. So the team were all on hand at the right times to do that.
Yeah. So the first stage in the program was to migrate from the legacy hardware onto some new hardware, VMware based hardware. And I guess the objectives there are twofold. Number one, remove the immediate scaling constraint we had around CPU capacity, and then secondly, provide a foundational step for cloud readiness. And yeah, I guess Simon here, going back to what you were saying on the QE framework, it was about early engagement, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for this stage, this is where the architect's role came into their own really very early on, is making sure we have the baseline and making sure the standards were maintained throughout the cycle. So really looking at that continuous and early delivery of quality. But the key things were really the data center provider. We had to make sure the data center provider was doing their own validations on the new kit and making sure they're sharing results so we can review them. And then making sure we had the right assurance and testing at each stage. When the VMs got built, when the OS got installed, when the disks were updated for RAID configs, when the applications were installed, and then finally when it was integrated with other systems. So at each phase, we were able to identify those issues and keep on fixing those as we moved ahead. So we were on board and working side by side at every step along the way as we migrated across the VMs.
Yeah, and I think, going back to what we were saying earlier, the one team, this is bringing together, the easyJet project team, ourselves, the data center provider, and also a third-party partner with database expertise. So it really was a single team acting to deliver the results. And the results were an immediate 41% additional capacity delivered. So that removed the bottlenecks over or the constraints over the short term. But actually, by having this a larger capacity in place, we could drive the system more in test, and actually identified some additional future scalability bottlenecks, which took us on to the second phase of the program. And this is where we were looking at those bottlenecks that had been discovered. And really the objective here was to increase the system scalability to meet that forecast peak demand in 2025. So the background is the aircraft fleet's growing all the time across that time period, and we're needing the system to scale to meet that business growth. And I guess, Simon, do you want to talk a little bit here about the sort of underlying QE practices and processes that were taking place?
Yeah, so I mean, it was really divided into two parts at this point. There was the RCA phase, where we were literally doing RCA on each issue, and then identifying fixes, working through. That was done by the dedicated project team. So we'd make the change, we'd test, repeat, and do a cycle until we'd found the fix, and work through it that way. And then it was baking the fixes into the sprint teams that were delivering the changes. So we'd find a fix, then it went through the normal sprint cycles, and it was thoroughly tested across all stages. And these kind of cases were things like validating impact on other database tables, any primary key violations, and then data integrity checks as well. So we were doing it at all levels to make sure that we'd identified the bottlenecks as best we can.
Yeah, and the outcome, as you can see there, was increase in scalability by 85%. So that addressed any concerns over the medium to long term on scalability. And that significant uplift, if you like, actually gave the potential to address more revenue in the peak hour. So it's giving the marketing department the ability, should they choose, to drive promotions more intensely over a shorter period and drive revenue in a shorter period of time. But we weren't going to stop there. The next step was to look at even further improvements to drive improvements in resilience and scalability. And we knew already that a significant proportion of the workload hitting that database was read-only. So we've got flight availability search, which is a massive workload for easyJet. And that comes from different sources, from the website, from the mobile app, but also from their B2B partners. So their B2B partners, other agents, other travel agents, other third parties can access and search for flight availability through an API. So this was really important, Simon, wasn't it, to assess this proposed architecture and see whether it would deliver value?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the data integrity challenges between the nodes was key, and we had to make sure that all edge cases were covered. This, like you say, this could include the booking and flight availability for at the same time, to make sure that updated prices were reflected in real time. So there was lots of challenges around that. And then we also had to make sure we planned out the chaos around as well as the OAT testing, so the operational acceptance testing. So we were ready that if one or two nodes went down, or if the sync between the nodes was going to break, we were prepared for that, and we knew how to resolve the challenges. So there was lots of scenarios we needed to make sure we thought about and covered off with this that wouldn't usually come to mind.
Yeah, and offloading this availability search workload onto the replica, this gave us great improvements in terms of response time. It was 7 times faster, and that was fantastic in terms of we all know that responsiveness and conversion, there's a relationship there. So it helped to drive conversion. It gave the business more scalability to address more and more B2B partners. And in terms of bot and DDoS attacks, look, in the very unlikely case that those did get through, it does give us greater resilience to handle those. So the final step was to move to the cloud. And look, when you're moving to the cloud, you're taking what is a system with 20 years worth of engineering onto the cloud. There's a lot of options available in terms of what cloud architectures you can migrate to. And I guess here, Simon, it's we didn't want to spend months and months deciding on which architecture to adopt, right?
Correct. Yeah. So we did a series of POCs, and we made sure we set up the right quality engineering approach that could be used across multiple POCs where possible. So it gave us a framework that we could work from, which was tool agnostic and ran seamlessly using test scripts in Git, executed using GitHub runners, using tools like JMeter and others to inject loads, and getting the results directly back into the team's channels that we could feed the results and work closely on. And we explored things like browser stack and AI capabilities to test UIs and other things. So we had the full capabilities within the framework set up, and then that enabled us to coordinate those risks. So we knew what the approach would be, regardless of which approach we took. We set up the right model that the test manager and the architect would be able to identify what the key systems were that we needed to make sure we've got full robust testing on, and then other systems we were able to hand over to the teams that run that system to do their own testing and be confident in what testing was being delivered, to ensure that the reservation system was working correctly and interacting with their systems correctly. But very much that whole strategy was all based around risk, and we had that in place at the POC stage. So we knew that when we finally made the decision, that we'd be able to use that robust approach again for the rollout.
Yeah, and just expanding on those POCs, but not only was the question about, well, what cloud architecture should CRS move to, but also then questions arose around the integrations. Remember, this is a highly integrated system, and this is a particular interesting case study, I guess, in that the initial thought was to move CRS to AWS Dublin, and the API platform, the platform we were talking about there for B2B partners. The original thinking was to keep that on premise, but actually when we did some POC testing, we actually saw that the response times degraded by 70% in that hybrid configuration. And yeah, that was a bit of an eye-opener, wasn't it, Simon?
It was indeed, and it kind of it added an extra sort of challenge for us to work through, which we brainstormed and looked at how we could solve it. But yeah, it was that thing of we never thought there'd be that much of a degradation between on-prem and in cloud. So it was a challenge we needed to work through. We tried to work through those issues and eventually got to the right conclusion and how we move forward, which I think we'll talk about in the next slide.
Yeah, it was interesting on this one that it was actually when we got down into the detail of this and why this was happening, it was actually caused by a 12 millisecond latency between easyJet's on-prem data center and Amazon in Dublin. And you think, well, okay, 12 milliseconds doesn't sound like a lot, but actually in the context of a very coupled and chatty application, that can actually magnify over a large number of calls to a significant degradation in user experience.
Absolutely.
So that then turned attention to, well, what about all the other interfaces? What do we do with those and in all those other integrations? And I guess, Simon, here there was a danger we could have spent, weeks, months testing each and every one of those integrations.
Yeah, and this is where the whole one team mantra came in, really, because we did spend a bit of time together as a group working out which apps did we need to make sure we had a full, that as a central team we were doing our own testing on these integrations into the reservation system, and we identified a risk-based approach of what tests to do and how we would do it and where we'd put automation in place. And then we identified the apps that actually were less risk to the overall operation day to day, but they still needed to be tested to the right level. And we then worked with the relevant teams to make sure they were confident in the testing they were providing. And then, obviously we ran through this in the environment we had set up for testing, so we were confident, ready for the go live period where we would be rolling this out and doing those checks in production as we went.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point about the one team. There was really strong project management coordination at an easyJet level across all of its suppliers, and then you had all of the suppliers contributing and bringing their expertise. And then within each one of those circles you see there, you've got easyJet application specialists who know those integrations inside out. So really bringing all of that expertise together and with a strong program management wrapped around it was really important. Just to add to what Simon was saying, it was a risk-based approach, and we're looking at, is this a revenue earning integration? Are there stringent SLAs with this integration? Is it a regulatory workload? For example, we have advanced passenger information system that needs to notify government of passengers, or is it a high volume integration? And just asking some smart questions about the integration can help you assess the risk and define your move groups. So having moved to the cloud, CRS and all the other associated commercial systems, there's actually been a 30% reduction in spend when you compare, OpEx on the cloud to on-premise. And really there's 4 drivers going on there. First off, there's all of the great work that was done in the program before that to optimize. And we all know that when you've got an application or a workload that is highly scalable, highly performant, then cost is just another side of the same coin. Highly scalable, highly performant, it's going to be cost efficient. So when you take that to the cloud, you're going to get the benefit in terms of costs. Secondly, I think for the non-CRS components, when we see this elsewhere, it's really important to challenge the existing on-prem capacity and really ask the question, is that capacity needed? There's many reasons why historically firms would have over-provisioned in their own data centers, but when you're moving to the cloud, you've got the chance to challenge those and make sure that is right-sized. And secondly, across all of the different commercial systems we've looked at, we've seen, on average, a 42% improvement in performance. So like measures like throughput, when you're comparing the cloud to on-premise infrastructure. So that really tells us that we can avail of that price performance in the cloud. And yeah, we don't necessarily need to have the same capacity in terms of number of CPUs, etc. And then the final point, really, which is really pertinent to easyJet, is look, they've got really seasonal workload. So intraday seasonality, intra-week seasonality, clearly, seasonality between winter demand and summer demand. And when you've got that kind of seasonal demand pattern, it really lends itself to the cloud. And if you've got a fully scalable, by that we mean scalable up and scalable down, when you have that in the cloud, you can really take advantage of those seasonal workloads and get the cost efficiencies from those. I guess, Simon, is there anything you want to add more broadly, just on easyJet being a low cost airline and how that impacts IT?
I think it's enabled us to be very cost conscious, and we challenge this at every step, and that's been a key part of this. Is we're always looking for that extra tweak that will save us even more as far as the cost and the efficiencies that we look at. So we always try and optimize to the level that we all feel comfortable with, but we also we are conscious of that. And I think with the added flexibility that the cloud is giving us now to be, as you say, Danny, be able to scale up and scale down as and when we need to, it's a key driver for us to be able to move forward now at pace, is we've got the right setup from the cloud perspective to enable us to move forward.
That's great. So really, just to summarize, in terms of business value, I think there's a number of drivers of business value across this entire engagement. Firstly, and we started with this right at the beginning, supporting the business and its growth trajectory, both in terms of aircraft, and that, of course, directly links to revenue, having systems that can scale to support that revenue growth. We saw in the second phase, where we removed significant bottlenecks, that gave the business the potential to address an extra 14 million of revenue in their peak hour, and therefore turn the lever on marketing and promotional activity. We saw with the Reed replica that that gave greater resilience in terms of handling bot DDoS, but also, more importantly, delivering that sevenfold improvement in response time and user experience drove conversion higher. And then, as we said at the end there, the focus on low cost and being able to achieve that 30% reduction in OPEX, that was really powerful.
And that was all underpinned by our quality engineering processes along the way, looking at that and keeping the measures in place and the right levels of testing and assurance every step of the way.
Great. So I guess, Simon, I'll hand over to you. What's next from an easyJet technology point of view, and how do you see the partnership going forward?
I think we're moving to the cloud has given us that capability now to press on in more technically advanced areas. So we are looking at AI solutions. We're looking at more automation. We've got a lot of digital focus to move towards, and how we can better the customer experience. So there's some big projects coming that will improve the airport experience, improve the customer experience, all the way through the booking journey and into the airport as well. So there's lots of big pieces coming along, and with the complexity of our systems, we truly believe that there's going to be a need for the same support from Capacitas as we move forward. We're also looking at more agile approaches, so therefore we need to look at how we shift from the traditional consultancy model into coach the teams on how to do more of their own performance testing and support. So I see different models of working, but I still see the long-term strategic quality engineering partner in Capacitas and what you've become over the last 5 years, particularly. I see that continuing and growing as we move forward in the near future.
That's great. Thank you, Simon. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. So I shall hand back to Lisa at this point to close out and handle the Q&A.
Thank you both. It's a truly impressive journey over the past 20 years, and thank you for sharing the insights with us. We've had quite a lot of questions. I don't think we'll get through all of them, but we'll try. Danny, let's start with one for you. From your work with easyJet, what are the key takeaways or lessons you think other organizations can apply to their own performance, automation, and optimization strategies?
I think the key thing for me would be, look, start with what the business is trying to achieve, and for us at easyJet, there was a really clear steer, from the business and senior IT leaders, in that they wanted this platform to scale to meet the business's growth trajectory on aircraft. And I think if you have that focus, that business focus on what you're trying to achieve, then everything you do technically will follow on nicely from that. So understand what the business is trying to achieve, and align what you're doing technically to achieve those business goals, and it's hard to go wrong at that point.
Good advice. And I don't know which one of you wants to respond to this, but extra governance is great. How did you ensure it wasn't prohibitive and resulted in a net gain in output?
So I think it was about, from my perspective, the extra governance for something at this scale and at this risk profile, we needed to make sure we had the right levels of governance in place and make sure we set the expectations early. This wasn't about going fast and delivering it ultra quickly. It was about doing it right and making sure we have the right levels of checks and balances in place along the way to ensure that we're on the right trajectory. And if something's going wrong, we can alter course and correct ourselves. So the governance was necessary. Everyone in the project teams understood what levels of governance we needed. We weren't talking of having, there wasn't any 50-page test strategies and lots of paper documents. It was more about just getting the teams together and checking everything out. And even on the release night, the checklist of things we needed to make sure were in place was long, because it needed to be, because there was lots of integrations and interdependencies and challenges and extra rounds of testing that we wanted to make sure, because we had to get this right. There was, any downtime to our customers being able to book tickets or flights not being able to take off, that impacts us commercially and operationally. So we had to make sure that the governance was at the right level to enable us to be successful.
Yeah, I just echo that. I wouldn't advocate this approach for each and every workload out there that needs to go to the cloud. And it's, as Simon's spot on, really, it's the risk profile. And what you had with this system was 20 years worth of engineering, and that layer of integration across it, which was really the one area of risk. And as Simon said as well, then the other area of risk is not only is it a revenue engine, but it's also an operational engine. So it's it's what makes the airline tick in terms of getting passengers boarded and checked in. So you've got dual risk there to the business.
Thank you both. And we have a question here about, how do you know it's efficient cloud spend? Did you use KPIs? And if so, what KPIs did you use?
Oh, it's a good question. So obviously we had the baseline from the current on-premise, and that wasn't without its challenges. I think anyone who's got their own on-premise legacy data centers, it can be quite difficult to allocate and attribute cost in the data centers. That took some time. To the latter part of the question, how do you know what looks good? Well, there are benchmarks that we use. We look at cloud spend as a proportion of IT budget. There's other more detailed ones we look at in terms of, if we look at an e-commerce platform, which this was representative of, you can look at ratios of compute to storage to other, and you can compare those to what looks good. I think the other thing that's really important when you're looking at benchmarks is not to look at them at point in time. It's super important to look at the relationship between the underlying business driver. So in this case, it's aircraft or flight booking, to look at that underlying business driver and then look at how cost changes when that underlying business driver is growing. And sort of a rule of thumb, we can get into a lot more detail, but a rule of thumb is that, you know, your cloud costs should be growing slower than the underlying demand driver.
Thank you both. Another question is, observability in modern cloud infrastructure and software architecture has become complex, microservices and globally distributed. How are your experiences with that, and any specific learnings to share on that part?
I think on observability, I think and there's lots of great tools out there. I think my experience would be a lot of the implementations of those tools are solely focused on the technical side. So they're looking at it from a very, very technical lens, which is fine if you're looking at, the availability of an API or the responsiveness of an API. That's fine. But in addition to that, you need to then build that up to present a business view using that tooling. So these tools, very powerful, very strong. They can tell you what the business view is of observability in terms of customer experience. We were just talking there about the relationship between cloud cost and underlying business demand on a system, and these tools can do that as well, but you rarely see that. It's often too low down and too technical, which, don't get me wrong, that's good, but it needs to be built upon. I don't know, Simon, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think it's all about there's different aspects of how observability can be utilized, and I think the key thing I would say I've learned over the last few years is it's fine having the tools in place that generate all the data and all the alerts and whatever else that you have that need looking at, but it's having the people skilled enough to be able to interpret them in the right way and action them. And yes, there's some tools that can go into the level of detail of, well, it's exactly that line of code you need to change that's causing the problem. But sometimes there needs to be more understanding of the interpretation of the data that you're seeing, and having enough people trained to understand that can be really, really crucial. We've got some really good. We've got a whole observability team now within easyJet, and they're starting to grow the right effective monitoring and observability tools for IT, and it's really powerful to have people that are really skilled in that area to help us move forward. So yeah, I agree with what you were saying as well, Danny, but for me the tooling needs to be right and the people need to be trained effectively. I've seen examples where where tools have been put in place and almost expecting that the tool will do the work for them, and it's making sure you've got the right people around it.
Brilliant. Thank you both. I'm conscious of time, but let's just take one more. Simon, one for you. It's quite unusual for a partnership to last over 20 years. What's made this different, and why do you think it's worked as well as it has?
I think it's about the people. I think, when I joined in 2020, Capacitas were already relatively embedded within easyJet. And I remember even then people were telling me, people like Prasham and Danny, they knew more about easyJet than some of the easyJet employees did. And I think that's been a key aspect of it is the Capacitas guys almost have the same level of orange spirit as the easyJet guys do. And we all live and breathe, that we used to, before COVID, we'd all be in the big orange hangar together. We'd all be sat together. We'd all work together. And it's now sort of more raw, more hybrid, but we still live and breathe that. And you can pick up the phone to Danny or to Prasham or anyone from Capacitas, and they know as much about how things can improve at easyJet from a technology perspective and what we need to do here and there. And it feels like we're one extended team. And Capacitas's role has evolved, and as I've tried to push on with a more modern quality engineering strategy and moving away from just doing regression testing and UAT testing to being involved every step of the way, Capacitas have been there right with us. Prasham has been part of my leadership team for the last few years now to try and really help push forward the right agenda. And Capacitas live and breathe that strategy with us, and that's helped evolve the relationship to a point where more leadership opportunities, more automation opportunities, test environments work. It's all just been something that Capacitas have gone, you know what, we can do that. Let us help you with that. Here's a direction that we propose we can move forward with. Great, you're helping me move forward. Let's do it together. And I can turn up at Capacitas's office and feel welcome and feel part of the team at any point, and vice versa. And it just feels like we're one big family.
Yeah, I think Simon talked about the orange spirit. And I mean, a lot of firms talk about one team and whatnot, and it's sometimes it's gloss, but it actually is the case at easyJet. There are a set of values that the easyJet guys have outlined in their orange spirit, and it's not just us, other partners as well. It's an easy organisation to fit into and to be part of one team, and your voice is heard, and you've got that mutual respect and understanding, I would say.
Brilliant. Well, what a nice note to end it on. I'm very conscious of time, so I think we need to leave it there for today. Thank you, Danny, and a very special thank you certainly to you, Simon, for taking time to share our story. Just before we go, I just want to mention that we're hosting an audio event on Wednesday, the 11th of December at 2:00 with our service design director, Thomas Barnes, and also Dan Bennett, who is our DevOps practice director. And this will be a very casual discussion about how you can maximize cloud value and how you measure it effectively. You can join on the Capacitas LinkedIn event page, and I'd love to see you there. But listen, thank you to all of you for attending today. We really appreciate your company, and hopefully see you again soon. Thank you to you both, to Danny and to Simon.
Thank you.
Thank you.